Welcome back. So South Africa is increasingly grappling with extreme weather events, from devastating floods to scorching heat waves. As these natural disasters become more frequent and intense, the need to effectively have early warning systems and swift response measures has never been greater. During the post-cabinet briefing yesterday, the Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, said that Gauteng as well as the Northwest Province can expect extreme heat waves during the festive season. So how can we prepare for these severe weather? So to have this conversation, let's now speak to the head of the National Disaster Management Center, Dr. Bongani Sithole. Dr. Sithole, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So from the National Disaster Management Center side, what is it that you've observed, especially maybe over the past year or so?
Good morning. Good morning to the viewers as well. Yes, in the previous years, we've seen the increasing of the weather events with the devastating effects in those areas which we have identified that they will be affected by those weather events. If you go back around 2022, we've seen KZN being affected by floods. Then unfortunately, we lost a lot of people during those times. But from our side as a National Disaster Management Center, working with provinces and the municipalities, we have made sure that we have state of readiness, and then we put all our measures in place to deal with these extreme weather events.
Yeah, it's strange that in one end, sometimes even within a month, you can experience snowfall within the spring season, and then later on have a heat wave. Has the Disaster Management Center been able to look into what is causing these extreme weather events?
Yeah, we've realized that the issue of climate change, we can't run away from it because we've seen the change of seasons and indirectly complicate the response to those events. So we've been doing the predictions with the South African Weather Services and other institutions, specifically the institutions which are doing research to understand in terms of what are we going to face in the future as we move forward as a country, so that we can put measures in place to deal with those events as they unfold.
Yeah. What sort of concerns or headache does that then present to the National Disaster Management Center on also how it would advise government in terms of what its response should be?
Yeah, the concern is that we've realized that some of the areas which were not affected by, for example, like floods, and those areas now, they are experiencing floods. And while we are dealing with, for example, like cold, then in other provinces, then we'll experience extreme heat. And while we are saying, okay, it is winter season, you'll find that other provinces will then experience flooding during the time of heavy rains or the storms. In worst case scenario, even tornadoes. So from our side, we have said, okay, we need to work with the South African Weather Service, but also to prepare the communities, because we can put all the measures in place. If we don't do those drills, we don't work with the communities, or our early warnings doesn't reach the communities, then it defeats the purpose. So we work with those structures closer to the communities to make sure that we distribute all the early warning as early as possible, but also it reaches the intended recipients.
Yeah, and do you find that is the case? I'll give you a quick example. When there was that snowfall that was taking place in Van Rynen's Pass, where a lot of travelers were stuck on the N3 because of the snow, we perhaps here on the news were sharing the news that this is what the weather forecast, this is what the weather service is forecasting, but yet you still have people that were still traveling. Some don't know, I don't know whether some would have missed what was happening on the news, but who else's responsibility is it to communicate to residents what is there to expect, especially when there is going to be extreme adverse weather?
Yeah, if I can make an example like your snowfall, we communicated enough in terms of advising the motorists, the communities that in that area, it might experience the snowfall. But maybe from our side, we realize that is the behavioral change which we need to deal with. But also, not only that, we need also to come to the point where we have distributed early warnings, but also then we work with other agencies. In this case, for example, if we are dealing with highways, we'll then bring the SANRAL on board. Then we can actually close those highways, because sometimes we always say, okay, the communities, because I mean, if you can just go back and think, most of those people who were trapped in the snowfall, most of them, we assume that they will have phones because they've got cars. They can, I mean, they have got access to the media as well. So they did receive the early warnings, but it was a matter of, no, maybe it might not be that much intense. So from our side, once we get that kind of indications, we need to move to a point that we actually close down those roads so that the communities or the motorists, they don't find themselves trapped in those kind of scenarios.
Yeah, I think you may have a point there around the behavioral change, because if you think about it, we live in South Africa and we don't ordinarily have such adverse weather patterns like what we're currently seeing, especially over the past 3 years. So the attitude of some people is that, no, it can't be that bad. It can't be that bad. But how do we change all of that to say that maybe looking at some of the coverage coming out of countries like the US and how we always cover the storms and the devastation around the storms in the US, maybe South Africans too need to now become more aware around the impacts of climate change, but also how they personally would respond to this adverse weather in terms of how they prep for it.
Yeah. In the past 2 years, we conducted a benchmark exercise to more or less 80 countries across the world. The idea of the benchmark study was actually to go and learn from those countries. How do they implement the early warnings, the response capabilities, so that we can bring those lessons learned from those countries and implement them here in South Africa? Because I agree with you, in other countries, for example, if they are facing hurricanes, they will actually evacuate communities without actually any struggle, because the communities are familiar with the drills and so on. So out of that benchmarking exercise, what we are going to do, we are going to implement it in South Africa, but also not just to talk about it, but actually making sure that communities, they participate in drills, simulation exercises, so that next time when we issue early warnings, and they know that what they must expect.
Okay, I look forward to that and on to see how that is going to play out as well. I think it could assist a lot. Just quickly in conclusion, the warning yesterday coming out of Cabinet as well about the heat wave that is expected in Gauteng as well as the Northwest. What's your advice to residents in such cases? Because the other part around it is with the food as well. How do you store your food if you don't have a fridge, for instance? If you decide not to put your food in the fridge, the impact that could have on the quality of the food?
Yeah, I think it's very important that our food storage, actually, we store our food in the safe places so that we avoid indirectly food poisoning. That's number one. Number two, we know that people are very busy. They need to go out there and work. But there are cases where we always advise people that they must not expose themselves too much in the sun, because some of the people, they've got other conditions which actually the sun might actually affect them. We don't want to see a situation where we've seen it in UK, where we have elderly people dying because of the heat waves. Fortunately, here in South Africa, we've been managing it very well, but we always advise the communities to say they must take care of the elderlies, and then they must make sure that they don't expose themselves in the space where they might actually be affected by the heat wave. I know that is not easy, but it's work in progress.